Hi there, Randi Green here. Let us continue the little story. When I say it's a little story, I'm opening up for the interpretation of the narrative I'm here presenting in a way that you could say, is it real? Is it story? Is it fiction? Does it apply? Does it not apply? Well, we all have our story to tell that's linked to our own past and what we remember. And this is how I see it and how I remember. Does it make it a universal truth? No, but it does make it a version of the universal truth, anchored in via my remembering and what I hold in my field and what I am here to clear out as part of the cross. And you know that cross because you actually have it in your astrological chart that tells you on which level you're on. And as well as the polarity forces that we have not had the pleasure of to the same degree as we are entering now, as we are moving towards the 2-8 pillar. There are these kind of weird couplings between the pillars, which is a whole other level of science that is not necessary. But what you should take away from when I tap a little bit into these sciences is there is science behind everything that goes on. Similar like, with our reality field science as we know of them today as part of the 3-9 pillar, where we are talking general science on the micro and macro level, from quantum sciences to a normal general relativity and what have you. All of these are quote-unquote sciences. Sciences shows the dynamics of what the worlds are made of on whatever level we are looking at it, be it psychologically or matter-based or whatever it is. All of these are the sciences that are learned when you go through the 3-9 pillars. So that's also part of the understanding of the knowledge that to a large degree cloak the true radiation field and the true ability to understand what the worlds are about. So the 3 lineages. The story I'm going to tell you goes back to the Germanic races, which others know as the Celts. Now, the Celts are not what you can find on the internet. The Celts were the last we know of them as the Druids. But it goes further back than that. Remember, I talked about the ones that got reseeded as part of the lineages after the fall of Atlantis. Now, we know some of these lineages as they dispersed around the planet, with each one of them had a section of the teachings that they were supposed to exemplify to undo the effects of their participation in the fall of Atlantis. And that means the wrongful use of energy and consciousness. Most have a tendency to romanticize Atlantis. We know very little of it. But I can say it was a super advanced civilization that has very little to do what people have been tapping into from the collective distortion fields, the artificial layovers, and intercepted storylines that have been engineered to again build a barrier into what truly happened of unfortunate genetic modification, wrongful use of technology, the worst type of AI you can imagine that we had already played out in the previous world wars that were literally not world wars inside this reality field, but the wars of the world, the worlds that existed in the previous reality fields, often associated under the different groups of the 3-9 pillars. Many of you then, know these as the angelic wars. But the angelic wars is just another way of cloaking the avian reptile lineages that were associated with different groups amongst the 2-8 pillar and the 3-9 pillar, as well as the 4-10 and 5-11 that decided to join together. But this is another story again of the coalitions, the alliances that go together and fall apart and have issues with creating any form of unity. They rarely get to the 6th dimension. And those who do, they get into the 6th dimension as not an opposition, not a polarity, but as the great divide. You see, the sixth dimension is where we either do the Great Divide or the Great Unity. So those of us who are for the progression, we seek to unify and do the unity where we are working as a team for the highest good of many with everything that we have learned for the sake of the reality fields and the worlds beyond that we get access to in the sixth dimension. So the sixth dimension is the bridge to the galactic level. The ones that are doing the Great Divide, they want to get to what often is associated with the D8 collective. The D8 collective are tied at the top of the 2-8 pillar, where the bottom is Venus, the Venusians, the 2 pentagrams, as well as the top level of that is the Orion system. The Orion system used to have the White Elder Strand, but they've lost that. So the forces that are there are often associated with, I think Rudolf Steiner called it Black Sphere. So that's the what we could say the galactic version of the void, except that the void has no life whatsoever. It's beneath dimension 1. It's the route out of everything and to not even dust, but ceasing to exist altogether, annihilation. But the 8th dimension, the D8 collective, is what we could say the bridge into the previous universal cycles that were supposed to be aligned with the future lineages and the future cycles that were to utilize and transform all of the transformed energy units from the previous cycles into their new version imbued with consciousness units that will then lead to what we understand as life force. Now, the D8 collective, they misuse this because, unfortunately, this is very difficult, but it's galactic level. And if I go in and begin to talk about the groups that are there, they're just representations of some very large dynamics that governs the D8 collective and the D8 or the 8th dimension. So the 8th dimension is to be understood. That's where you have either black holes or the opposite that generates the transformed energy units, either imbued with progressive consciousness, generating life force that leads to the future cycles and become the foundation of that, or the opposite, death. And here, death does not mean complete annihilation. Death means the lack of the ability to progress, to elevate, to get connected to the future cycles, but remain inside a circulation that eventually will lead to the void. So that's the prospect of the wrongful use of energy and consciousness. So all of that comes from the D8. There's a reason why there are some pretty big nebulas in the Orion constellation. And when people say it's the hunter, for me, when I look at that, it's a very large spider, but that's a hunter. It has very little to do with a man, as things have turned out, because the ones that ended up winning that system had very little to do with civilizations that we would understand as anything that could be aligned with human or a human mindset. They are by far became, especially after the Andromedan Wars, where they disconnected, created the Great Divide in the 8th dimension in the Andromedan system. They got so disconnected, and the Andromedan system are technically now the carrier of the gate out of our universal structure, and that's now been elevated into the D9 collective. That is what the M31 galaxy is now providing for us. So we could say originally the D8, the Orion system, was the gate out, and that understanding is important when we look at some of the civilizations that decided to create their anchor point in Egypt, and why they worshipped the Orion constellations, and why they had 3 pyramids. Not that I'm going into that, but all of this, the pyramids are the top level of some very large cubes where the top is manifested and the bottom goes down to the deeper layers of our reality field, connected to some of the shield technology that the Lemurians generated, and by that allowed for some of what we could call artificially induced resurrection technology. When you understand that, then whatever you see of folklore and mythology and whatever you have from Egypt and what was going on in Egypt suddenly makes a lot of sense. The technologies under the Orions, when that existed, and we are talking about some 16,000 years ago, or if not more, 18, 19,000 years ago, were run by the Assyrians. Has nothing to do with the myth that you know of. That's just a later mythology or mythologification, I wanted to create a word there, of the original sciences and the original civilizations that were there. The myth is the folklore version of the original history. So it has nothing to do with Isis and Osiris and Horus and whatnot, because these are just made up quote-unquote deities that were to show the latecomers, the commoners, some kind of tapping into a distortion, a story that would cloak them as part of the astral barrier from the true events so that they would no longer recall the true history, and by that connect to the timelines that would either release them or to the timelines that would redeem them. So with that understanding, we also understand that we are having civilizations within our reality field, and now we're going back to Atlantis again. First, we had on the top level the three lineages as part of the houses of the original civilizations that messed up via the project that we understand as Atlantis, where they got the last and final chance as part of the fifth cycle to redeem themselves. That means to completely let go and be annihilated, and whatever was left would then be transferred out or released as in earlier stages and then recalibrate and start all over. As well as the reseeding for those who had what we could call enough level of understanding to get a level of teaching that they would get with them that would allow them to begin anew within the new fourth cycle reseeded version of their lineages. And there were created 4 groups, and the Hopi prophecy talks about these 4 civilizations, as I have as well. That's the tree of life. You have the white, the black, the yellow, and the white. Now the white are the Germanic races as we know of them, the Celts. So let us take away the word Germania, because we have Germania, we have Britain, we have America, and we have Europa. All of these are later versions of the original civilizations and the divisions that were made at the time, as well as Asia and all of these things. But all of these are civilizations that are now inhabiting our planet, that were reseeded again, but under the extraterrestrial colonial forces that took over our reality field 15,000 years ago and mixed everything up, so we can't really say one or the other. But we're here talking about the times long before our current understanding of civilization and the world that we have today. So the 4 groups were reseeded, and each and one of them had their own version of the teachings that they were to use as part of their recalibration and reunification with the original solar system, humanities. And that's where the first version of the enclosure came in play. Back then, it was not called the enclosure, it was called a sphere that had 4 different realms from where these 4 different lineages could tap in, get the information they needed via the holographic teaching system, and unfold their original consciousness potentials and what we could say, close the door finally to the mishap of the previous universal cycles that had reconfigured their genetic lineages into these 3 houses, into aspects of consciousness that were not particularly conducive for the highest good of the many. They call it for the common good or the greater good, but that often and is unfortunately associated with what we could say lesser productive versions of the D8 collective energy that either leads to correct life force or leads to death. And death is the entrance, annihilation, and the void. Okay, so the four lineages. So they were, you can figure out that one of the groups were given, that's the Assyrians. The other group, that's the black. The other group were the Celts, that they were called something else originally, but this is the best I can give you. That's the white group. They were a mix of Syrian A and Syrian B genetics. The Assyrians had a high degree of Orion genetics, but of the original Orion elder strand, modified for the purpose of reseeding into the fourth, and gave them the technology of revivification or the resurrection, as I talked about, in these ancient civilizations. They were under the guardianship of the Lyra constellation to begin with, as well as some of the Pleiadians and other groups of the progressives that were assisting them in the correct use of technology at the time, which they lost the access to. The Assyrians lost the access to that due to the upcoming pharaonic lineages that began a long time before known history. And they got greedy and they got more materialistically oriented. And they decided to use that technology for personal gain and eternal life, created the Ankh technology, and began to create chambers and different forms of advanced technology that would assist them in their different resurrection rituals that took place in secret chambers beneath the pyramids. Okay, so I will just leave that there. The councils decided to take away the power of the Assyrians, and with that, of course, creating the myth, cloaking what was left of the access they had to the fourth dimension, sealing up the doors, and removing their portal, which is under the Sphinx. That was the guardianship of the Lyrans that were there. They had a gate in and out of this reality that went through inner earth, and that door was shut, sealed off, and the Assyrians were left to their greedy processes and what they chose to become. And we now know these as the pharaohs and some of the lineages that came in play there. So that's that lineage that kind of got exiled, let's put it that way, in Africa and whatever that turned into. So that's the history of the land there. Then we have the Germanic races, or the Celts, that were, we could say their main gate is in Britannia. Of course, you can figure that one out for yourself. They existed a long time before the black-haired migrated from Mesopotamia or Babylon and went up north. These have nothing to do with the original white-skinned races. They were, the black-haired were part of that branch under the Lemurians that built a high culture in Mesopotamia. And then we had the high culture of India, and people always say that's the yellow, and that in India as well as Tibet and China, long before whatever has come up now, used to be a completely different civilization, which it is no longer. There's only very little left, and these lineages are wearing out, having had their last teacher or avatar that came from or were born into the Raja lineages in India. Because as you remember, the lineages that came and were reseeded from Atlantis, they were using power in a way that led to what we understand as the king lineages, as well as the priestly lineages, as well as the nobilities and the ones that, in whatever form it is, position themselves in a level of power where they say, we control and take care, quote unquote, of this reality field, and we are in contact with the gods. So the story of the people of the original lineages, the Aryans that went to the Indus Valley, because it's more accurate to call it the Indus Valley. The ones what was left of the lunar Syrians that went to the Indus Valley became the Aryans, that were the original group of the, what we understand as an Ahat, a noble one. Their nobility was priestly, so therefore it's very dissimilar. They later on turned into the Brahmins, and they had with them the Vedas and some of these stories, and they were unfolding the archetype of the hero, the divine warrior hero, in whatever that means, where the battlefield was not as much other territories, but themselves within themselves. So that's the 1-7 pillar that they choose to work with to the best degree that they could, so that they could get the cross to become the turning wheel. So that gives a good understanding. And the nobility there, the Rajas, the hearts, the noble ones, they were the warriors of energy and consciousness for the rightful use, to get the wheels to turn, to become the enlightened one that walked with the fire wheels turning, so that everything that he would touch, unfortunately, this is mostly oriented towards the humanoid lineages, which are the foundation of what we call male. They were to walk the grounds, and everything they would come in contact with would transform and dissolve the cross, and by that allow them to step into the true knowledge and the path that would lead them out of here as part of the 5th cycle, the higher mind, the true understanding of reality. Again, I'm weaving around just so you understand. So we have completed the chapter of, for now, the black people, the Osirians, that were connected and were supposed to transform what they had been part of, the wrongful use of energy and life force in Atlantis. We also know that that did not go so well. Many of the ones that were part of the 5th planet got reseeded in what we understand as Egypt. And back then, technically, we only have the little remains of Egypt. And we can ask why these positions are put there, and that has, of course, to do with specific nodal points that are functioning as gate systems into different levels of the original reality field grid, where the map is kept in inner Earth and are associated with the majority of these nodal points that currently are positioned in the original 4th and original 5th and original 6th, the core level of our reality field, which is part of what we understand as inner Earth. Again, what you have learned is most likely not what it actually is. So we have now got the yellow people and their teachings, the priestly lineages. We have got the technology-oriented, that's the Osirians. And then we have got what is important about the white people. And again, the Hopi prophecy. It's probably not a bad idea to listen to that one, although it is, of course, from the angle of the red or brown-skinned people. So I'm just thinking the red, the black, the yellow and the white, the red people, the red-skinned people. They were the civilizations that we saw the last descendants of as part of the Hopi people, living in the area of what we understand or see today as Arizona, New Mexico, Phoenix, that area down there. which also explains some of the UFO activities that are going on. That level I am not ready to talk about to the degree that it truly deserves, because there are still gaps in my own memory of what that actually is, and what they were supposed to do, because there's a wound for me there that I haven't worked my way through to the degree I should. I worked my way through the wound that I got from the priestly lineages of the yellow branch. The black people, the Assyrians, I have had my visions, and that these visions I choose to, they were there, I cleared them out, and then I let them go, because they are tied to the Orion system, and hence not something that should be further explored, other than you go in, you clear it out, you let it go. And then there is the red skin, of which I do have a previous incarnation. I have worked with that in other places, but that one did not go so well. We could definitely say that this is playing a part in what's going on in America right now, of course. And thus that will be revealed in due time what that means. And that's why the Hopi prophecy is very important when we talk about the dynamics of America, because it's tied to the red people and not to the quote unquote different groups of people that are now in America. So they are still having their role to play, and that is connected with some of the groups in inner earth that have not yet decided whether or not they will support their fellow beings that are now in the outer rim of our reality field. So that leaves us with what's left of the Celts, and that's the story that I want to talk about today. So with that, I'll end this podcast and see you in the next one.